We're also scheduled to end by 1:30 p.m. and in about the last 5 to 10 minutes, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions of Dr. Shimatero. So you can submit those questions at any point in time. If you have a question you want to make sure we answer, you can submit it now, and we'll be reading those questions off to Barbara a little bit later on in the broadcast. And then finally, you will notice that we do have some polling slides that we'll be sharing with you throughout today's presentation. And we've opened up that first poll, which is asking, how did you hear about today's webinar? So again, you should see these polls on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are in full screen mode, you might need to escape to break that up so you can see the polls and the chat functions on the screen. But if you could take a moment to respond to that poll, just let us know how you heard about us. Does two things. One, kind of tests out to make sure you can see the poll feature, and then also we'll have some different questions throughout the webinar, and your responses will help us gear the content a little bit better. So in today's webinar, we're going to begin with some introductions of the presenters, and then we'll go through some background on the evolution of cyber threats, current cyber threats, defending against cybersecurity attacks. We'll talk a bit about the future, and then again, we'll have that Q&A at the end of today's webinar. So while we get started into introducing ourselves, I'm going to open up our second poll, and we would just like to hear from you. What is your affiliation with Walsh College, if any? And this first poll is going to take just a moment to close up before I open up the next poll in here. For those of you who are joining us just a minute or so late here, we'd like to let everyone know that all participants will be in listen-only mode for the duration of today's webinar, and you can use your chat function to communicate with our presenters for today. You should see that second poll that's now been opened up on your screen, and if you could take a moment to respond to that while the presenters give their introductions, we'd greatly appreciate it. So who we are, well, my name is Brenda Meller, and I'm in the marketing department here at Walsh College, and I'll be serving as your host for today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Barbara Shimatero, and I'll let Barbara introduce herself, and then I'll turn control of the presentation over to Barbara.
Hello, everyone. I really appreciate you spending time with us to learn more about the evolution of cybersecurity attacks. I am known by my students as Dr. C because most folks are unable to pronounce my beautiful Sicilian last name. So please feel free to address me as Barbara, as Dr. Shimatero, or as Dr. C. So I'm anxious for us to get started. I have, as always, those who know me know I probably have more than enough information to fill an hour. I do like the idea of making it more interactive, so although we're going to save most of the questions to the end of the webinar, if it's a relevant question that addresses something I am speaking about on the slide, please post it in chat, and Brenda and I can determine whether or not it would be appropriate to answer that question at that time. So for those of us who have been involved in cybersecurity for many years, we have seen cyber threats and cyber attackers evolve over the years. One of the greatest challenges we have currently is that the attackers are innovating much faster than the defenders can keep up with. Defenders both being cybersecurity professionals, law enforcement, the law, society. So we're going to be talking about several areas that the attack vectors are growing so fast and we're struggling to keep up with them. What we're seeing now is we're seeing the commercialization of malware where you can purchase attacks, you can rent botnets, you can, in many ways, purchase the tools that you need to conduct the attacks. Now, initially, at the very beginning of cybersecurity attacks, the early hackers were just focused on demonstrating that they could do it. There wasn't really damage that's done. Kevin Mitnick would possibly make some long-distance calls, but a lot of what went on was, let's just do it. Let's just show you that we can breach this system for bragging rights. So was there a problem with?
I think we just had an audio hiccup there. I believe we should have cleared that out, so we should be good here.
Okay. So can everyone hear me better now? Just want to make sure. Usually no one has problems with that. So we're going to discuss, as we talk about the evolution of cyber threats, we're also going to talk about motivations, because we have seen the motivations change over the years. As I said, early hackers were proving that they could do it. It was persistent curiosity. It's in many ways when the hacking term was viewed more positively. We then began to see that cyber attackers were now more interested in causing certain amounts of damage, or at least wreaking havoc with the growth of viruses and the growth of worms. The first worm, as many of you probably know, was the Morris worm that was created by a student whose original purpose was just to be able to count how many nodes there were on the internet. Well, that worm just grew, took over so many systems, and ended up wreaking havoc. In his case, it was not intentional. But what we saw were cyber attackers began to see how quickly malware could spread through the internet. And with that, we saw all of those wonderful viruses and malware that were so common in the 1990s. And what we also saw was the growth of virus protection software. And in many ways, once we got that software installed and we got it mandatory on people's desktop, man, we thought we were golden. We had the problem solved. Cyber threats were under control. Of course, as I said, cyber threats have evolved. And as we've evolved, we've now moved into cyber attacks that are focused on stealing data or other information. So one of the first questions I want to ask you is, do you agree with the statement that there's two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they have been hacked?
Yeah. I'm just going to give some brief instructions here. You should be seeing the poll on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're viewing the webinar in full screen mode or on your phone, you might not be able to see that. In full screen mode, you can hit escape, and then that poll panel should open back up for you. But if you could please take a moment to participate in that poll now. And for those of you who have joined us a few minutes late, we'd like to remind you that all participants will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you're having any trouble hearing the audio, or if you have any other technical difficulties, please let us know by using that chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. And then also do keep in mind the last 5 to 10 minutes of today's webinar will be your opportunity to ask Barbara any additional questions or to refer back to any of these earlier subjects. Okay, so we're just closing off the poll now. We've got a lot of people on the session today, so it's taking just a few moments. And in about 10 seconds here, I'm going to go ahead and share the results on the screen. And there we go, Barbara. So how did we do?
Very interesting. I would have thought true would have been higher. This is actually a quote from the FBI when they have tried to alert companies to the presence of cyber attacks, that whether or not you know it, and we're going to talk about this a little later on, you have probably been breached. And 90% of companies actually reported at a Kaspersky study that they had been breached in some way or another. Many companies are hesitant to report it, but more disconcerting is the fact that cyber malware and attacks can reside on a system on average for 6 months before they become recognized. That's when people say, well, how couldn't TJ Maxx, how could they have been removing so much data for so many periods of time? It's because people were not aware that someone had already breached their system and created an environment where it was hard to detect that they were there, and began to gradually remove data from the environment, and we see this over and over again. So as we see the evolution of cyber threats from a nuisance to cyber crime, we now see that cyber criminals their motivation is money. It's greed. You can see the statistics. Crime involving computers and networks has cost the world economy $445 billion annually, and that was a report in 2014. Cybercrime will cost businesses over $2 trillion by 2019. The other flip side to this is that the cybersecurity business environment is now a $60 billion industry. So we're spending enormous sums of money trying to fight these cyber crimes and cyber attacks, but they are morphing. They're changing, as we say, often at a faster pace than we can keep up with them. And we're going to talk about the mobile environment, but we have seen that cybercrime in the financial institutions, which was always very high, financial institutions have always been attacked because of the money issue, but now with the increase in mobile banking, they're seeing this kind of cybercrime increase even greater. And of course, ransomware is a direct request for money, or else I'm going to shut your system down. So we see cybercrime, as I say, continue to evolve as the motivations of the attackers have evolved. Now, one interesting area of cyber threats is hacktivism. Hacktivism is really the combination of hacking and activists. So it started out being used by people who wanted to make their political position known, who wanted to speak about something and had to do with social unrest or other kinds of activities. The interesting thing is hacktivism was first termed in 1996, and there was at that point a hacktivist attack. Since then, and at that point, that's the true nature, right? We're just here to make a point. We're here to promote social unrest or political unrest or freedom of information. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that hacktivism in many ways is merging with cyber terrorism and cyber crime. We're seeing that it's not just defacing websites anymore. It is now stealing data, making that data publicly available that can harm individuals, can harm companies, doing massive denial of service attacks to shut down companies, implement malware in them. So we've really seen hacktivists grow from simple attacks to very sophisticated attacks, and oftentimes within the hacktivist community, we see a mix of hacktivism and terrorism going on simultaneously. So everything is evolving continuously. As we see the boundary between an operation as a simple act of protest or cybercrime is very thin, and that's where we're seeing this happen. We're seeing serious damage occurring in the private and public sectors due to this merging of hacktivism and cyber terrorism. Cyber terrorism is really tied closely to one of our other topics, which is going to be cyber war. Cyber terrorism is used in a number of ways. Now, Stuxnet was one of the first cyber terrorist attacks, and of course it was done in joint by the United States and Israel. Stuxnet was one of the first cyber terrorist attacks that affected the physical operations of devices so that those devices would malfunction over time. For those of you who know about Stuxnet, what they were able to do over a long period of time was keep what appeared to be normal operations on the screens of the monitors of those viewing the operations of the facility, when in fact behind the scenes damage was being done to the physical devices, causing damage and causing them to stop functioning. Now, we have seen cyber terrorism occur in many other ways as we see cyber terrorists understand that with the increasing hyperconnectiveness in our environment, it is very easy to cause serious damage. We're not talking as much about stealing of data, although that still goes on with cyber espionage. We're talking about the ability to be able to implant malware at certain points in time and in places so that when we're ready to launch a cyber terrorism attack, we can just pull the trigger on those. So we are seeing cyber terrorism also be used for recruitment. There's a whole information warfare where cyber terrorism uses the internet to recruit, to plan. We know that Second Life was an environment where people would practice terrorist attacks. We know that games are often used for that. So the world, the opening up of the internet has opened up so many different attack vectors and methods that cyber terrorism is now a very real threat. Now, of course, that cyber terrorism was a very important part of the creation of the fifth domain of war, which is cyber war. This was actually the cyber command, and the cyber domain of war was initially talked about in 2010. What we've seen, however, is that various nation states, including the United States, are preparing the battlefield. They are implanting things in national infrastructures around the world so that in the event of a launch of a cyber attack, a cyber war, people will be able to shut down key functionality around the world. There's competition for zero-day vulnerabilities, and actually the NSA is the largest purchaser of these zero-day vulnerabilities. Here's the catch, though. They don't share them with the commercial world. They don't share them with the public. They store them as potential weapons that they can use in the event of a cyber war. We have, the United States is now viewed as the strongest cyber offensive country in the world. We have taken the offensive aspects of war and translated those into cyber war with cyber weapons, with all of the different infiltrations that's necessary. That's not saying other countries aren't doing it as well. We're very aware that other countries are doing it as well, but we have placed a lot of money and a lot of attention to being prepared for a cyber war. Now, one thing that's very interesting is there's a lot of dispute out there as to whether a war could actually be purely a cyber war. Most experts agree that a cyber war could start in the cyber world, but more than likely would become a hybrid war that involves the more traditional aspects of warfare along with cyber war. So cyber is just a new set of weapons that we can use in the event of a war. So let's talk about some of the current threats that are so common and so devastating that we wonder why we haven't closed these holes. Mobile devices. Now, I laughed because having been the chief technology officer at several companies before mobile BYOD, bring your own device, was popular, I laugh and say I would have hung myself if there was BYOD at my company because of the amount of threats. What you're doing is you're bringing your world and everything attached to it into your work environment, and everything from your work environment back into your home environment and any other Wi-Fi environment that you connect with. More than 1 million mobile apps are classified as malware, and that's a low number. So when you are using apps on your computer and you are then connecting to a business environment or your home environment, the mobile devices have become the most common method of spreading malware and cyber attacks. So we have malware from apps, we have malware from Wi-Fi networks that you launch into, and the BYOD opened up all of this so that the increase in cyber attacks was so dramatic that now it's very common. Most of us in technology and cyber say, well, of course, we've instituted a mobile device management program where we control what's on the devices, we make sure that they're secure, that they connect safely to our Wi-Fi. But here's a statistic that's very, very concerning to me. The use of mobile device management system software in a recent survey in 2016 said that only 20% of the companies surveyed had mobile device management. So most companies are still basically opening their doors to malware by including mobile devices, welcoming them into their environment, and then welcoming them back into their home environment. I was once asked, as we'll talk about when we get to the Internet of Things, as to the insecurity of baby monitors. And I was asked, well, how can you secure baby monitors? And my response is, with all the attack vectors that there are, how can you, it's where do you want to plug the holes? But mobile devices can easily bring malware into your home network that would then allow access to a number of connected devices, including baby monitors, including alarms, including webcams. So mobile devices, we're carrying our own computer, but we're not protecting it as most of us have become accustomed to protecting it. Even the amount of people who have virus protection on their mobile device is low. We would never think of not having virus protection on our computers. We've learned the hard lesson, yet our phones, which are actually our computers, we neglect to even secure them with the most rudimentary virus protection. And also we've learned that stolen phones are one of the most common attacks out there, and yet most people do not spend the time to have a password or a PIN on their mobile phone. So mobile phones continue to be one of our greatest cyber threats. And with the interconnectedness with everything else, we are finding attackers are being very creative in how they move through the systems. Cyber physical systems is another current threat. And the challenge with cyber physical systems is that most traditional cybersecurity professionals have no idea how to secure these systems. We are used to putting up an appliance, an IDS system, a firewall in front of our networks. We're used to adding virus protection software or doing other kinds of methods to secure encryption. When we're dealing with cyber physical systems, we are usually dealing with real-time systems that have to respond in milliseconds. We can't put an appliance in front of that. We can't have it run through virus protection. We have to secure those systems in a very different way than we're used to doing. And that is one of the challenges we're facing right now, is that most folks are not familiar with how do you secure these embedded devices. When I talk, we'll talk about automotive cybersecurity, but when I speak at the automotive cybersecurity conferences, the automotive companies, their suppliers are frustrated. They bring in cybersecurity professionals, but those professionals have no idea what the limitations are in embedded systems and cyber physical systems. These systems were built for safety, reliability, and speed. Adding security to those systems can compromise any of those desired characteristics. So folks are really struggling with how do we secure cyber physical systems. Tied to cyber physical systems is the wonderful world of the Internet of Things. The Gartner Group has stated that currently there are 4.9 billion connected Internet of Things devices. They predict that it will reach 25 billion devices by the year 2020. Everything that we use is becoming interconnected. Whether or not it's our phones, if you have the Nest thermostat, that connects you to the internet. As I say, if you have baby monitors, that connects you to the internet. Your Wi-Fi connects to the internet. I was at a conference one time and one of our white hat researchers reported on an exercise that he did. He was flying in a plane. He gained control of another laptop that was connected to, that had connections to their smart stove. He was able to break into the smart stove that, of course, is connected to the internet. So if you want to remotely change a temperature, you can do that. Broke into that smart stove, which is really just an embedded system with little to no security, broke into the Wi-Fi network of that home and launched an attack against power systems on the West Coast because of the interconnectedness of all of these devices. Smart homes, smart locks. You use your phone to unlock it, guess what? Very breachable. everyone wants to be interconnected with everything. But what we're finding is an HP study found that 70 to 80% of Internet of Things devices did not have basic security, such as password protection or the use of encryption. We are seeing many innovators coming out with thousands to millions of devices to make our lives easier by interconnecting everything. Security is not high on their list. And now we're talking also about health care. We're talking about personal fitness devices. We're talking about insulin pumps. We're talking about, as you remember, Vice President Biden had to wear a lead vest so that they were not able to attack his pacemaker. We'll talk more about vehicles, but what we're seeing is that a change in the nature of attacks, because the Internet of Things are devices with embedded software that do something. So the cyber attacks are not just limited to the loss of data, as bad as that is, or identity theft, as bad as that is. We're not talking about connecting to these devices and taking control of them or disrupting services. We're talking about moving from data loss to life loss. And that is a very frightening change in the kind of cyber threats we're having. The Internet of Things poses tremendous challenges to us. A couple of the more common faults include, as I said before, insufficient authorization. We also have insecure interfaces between those devices and other devices. Massive privacy concerns, because guess what? All of these devices are collecting data. They're storing data about you in the cloud in various repositories, and you are not generally asked whether or not you are willing to give up that data. So privacy is a massive, massive issue with the Internet of Things and other things. So automotive cybersecurity, one of my very favorite topics, because guess what? Your car is now a computer on wheels. And that computer on wheels has opened up automotive vehicles, trucks, cars. They've opened them up to cyber attacks. If you can access the Internet or an external source through Wi-Fi, through Bluetooth, you can now get the attacks that enter your vehicle. So there's apps from your mobile devices. There's attacks that the goal is to break through the gateway. That is the gateway between the infotainment system, between the Bluetooth connectivity, between your mobile connectivity, your Wi-Fi. The goal is to break through that gateway and get to vehicle operations. And we know that that's been done. Automotive cybersecurity, the good news is now on the top of the minds of all of the automotive companies and their suppliers. The challenge is we're talking about cyber-physical systems, and once again we run into the same issues as to how do we secure these small embedded devices that have minimal memory in them and that you can't apply an appliance in front of them. So we have massive amounts of people working on this right now, trying to find solutions. We know that automotive companies have issued bug bounties because they want you to find vulnerabilities so that they can fix them. So one aspect of the Internet of Things is automotive cybersecurity, and of course when we get to the connected vehicle, where it ties to all of the infrastructure and everything else, the threats increase even more. And of course the other part of our connected world are the SCADA systems, the industrial control systems. Those systems have now been connected via the Internet. The problem is they're running on old legacy software that cannot be upgraded and made secure because it wasn't necessary before. We're running into people being able to remotely attack the system. The one big issue is the management consoles that are usually running on very old operating systems without patches, without updates. Also through the web applications that can be used to access these systems. So we're seeing these national infrastructure systems, the systems that allow us to live the life we're used to, being opened up to attacks because they have opened up to the Internet without securing from those kinds of threats and attacks that we know and are very common in the more traditional environment. So this is another example of the Internet of Things that is now tying to SCADA and industrial control system cybersecurity. And I know I have to speed up because I told you I could talk forever. So the next topic that is alarming is phishing. And why do I include phishing up here standing alone? 90% at an InfoGuard conference I was at a few weeks ago, 90% of cyber attacks begin with phishing emails. Once again, it is the human who is allowing many of these cyber threats and attacks to permeate the various environments. 100,000, should say 100 million phishing attacks every single day, and unfortunately many of them are successful. 90% that frightens me to no end. Tied to being able to get into systems through malware, through phishing, through your mobile device, is the threat of the advanced persistent threat. Now, most of the time we assume advanced persistent threats are done by very, very sophisticated attackers, either cyber criminals, nation states, because what is done is an entry into the network. And oftentimes the goal, once you're in the network, is to lay low. You're not in a hurry. You are trying to get into the network unseen. You then move through the network to get to those positions that give you the greatest privileged area. You discover where that is, where the data is stored. Also, you hide your attack. You rewrite logs. You do any number of things. This is where you may not even know you've been attacked until you begin to realize that the data has been exfiltrated, that they have captured data and removed it. A lot of this ties to cyber espionage, but it can tie to any number of threats. The attackers remain in the network, harvesting information and avoiding detection over long periods of time. So advanced persistent threats are another current threat that we are dealing with very sophisticated attackers, very knowledgeable, very sophisticated. What about insider attacks? Why do we have that? 58% of cybersecurity incidents are attributed to insider attacks. In the survey that I told you about with Kaspersky, 73% of the companies surveyed had an internal security incident during their past year. Sometimes insider attacks, their motive can be trying to get back. Sometimes they're there for theft of trade secrets or sabotage. But this is the real dilemma for CSOs, is you want to treat your employees as if they're trustworthy, but at the same time you have to realize that almost 50% of attacks occur through some partnership with insiders. So now let's try to talk about how we can defend against these. In the past, it was wonderful. In my first network, when I put up that firewall and I put up that IDS, I thought I was golden. Well, I learned very quickly that protecting the perimeter is not enough. And certainly protecting the perimeter is considered standard operating procedure, standard security hygiene, but is nowhere near enough to protect against phishing, insecure wireless attacks, smartphone malware, social engineering attacks, Internet of Things devices. All of those bypass your perimeter and are able to access your network, your environment, through any number of attack vectors. And what we're seeing is that as the Internet of Things and as we see this hyperconnectiveness, we see a dramatic increase in cyber attack vectors. It's how do you protect against? And that's one of the challenges in cybersecurity for those of you who understand this. All it takes is one vulnerability for an attacker to get in. You as the defender have to protect against every vulnerability. We also know that virus protection is no longer enough. The intelligent, sophisticated malware creators have created malware that know how to bypass virus protection. So we know that we have to move to new types of methods. One of those is threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is the idea that your endpoints are constantly being monitored. Your logs are being automated, your log review. You're getting feeds in from government, from private, from public sites. The goal with threat intelligence is to catch the attack as quickly as possible and minimize the amount of damage. Everyone knows you can be attacked, that there's any number of vectors, but if you can identify that attack within minutes and preclude that attacker from doing damage, you have moved light years ahead. And so threat intelligence is one of those silver bullets out there. Some pros and cons, it's very expensive, but we see that we're moving more toward using tools to be able to help us fight against these cyber attacks. Cognitive computing, our good friends IBM and IBM Watson, we're trying to develop cognitive computer security, where the system learns over time what is normal, what's not normal, and is able to highlight very quickly what is abnormal and prompt people to react to it. Tied to that, and see, here's where I'm running out of time on some of the most exciting areas, is artificial intelligence-based cybersecurity system. MIT built an artificial intelligence system that they claim was able to identify 85% of cyber attacks and stop them in real time. One of the big differences between cognitive and artificial, although they are merging, is that cognitive still relies a lot on the individual. Artificial intelligence is the goal is to make it respond in real time to the events happening based on the knowledge and the intelligence that they have learned or has been input into them.
All right, so I think we're going to just take a quick moment here, and I think we've actually had the poll open for a little while here, so we can actually close that off now, and then I'll give that just a second to tabulate the responses. And we are going to be coming up in Q&A in just a few minutes, and we've got some great questions coming in so far. We encourage you to continue to submit your questions using that chat panel, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you've been viewing this in full screen mode, you might just need to hit escape so that you can get that chat panel back over to you again. But I'm going to go ahead and share the results out. And regarding that question, have you or someone you know been the victim of a phishing attack? Well, how do we do in our results there, Barbara?
Well, it looks like it is very common. I'm not sure. I guess I'm wondering what that means. Could you have clicked on something and loaded malware and not been aware of it? That's very, very possible. When we talk about phishing, we talk about social engineering, and that is another whole webinar in itself. But phishing emails are no longer easy to spot. It's not just transfer $10,000 to me. They look very, very similar to the real thing. I once took an online phishing test, and I was over skeptical. I said everything was phishing because it all looked suspicious to me. And this is where we talk about, don't forget the basics. 90% of cyber attacks involve phishing. Security awareness is the only way to prevent that. You have to make your weakest link, which are your employees, people in your family, you have to make them so very aware of the kinds of risks that have to do with phishing emails and other types of social engineering attacks. It is also absolutely critical to patch your systems regularly. It is not difficult to search on the internet, find out what systems you're using, what their patch level is, and run it against a Metasploit database that can tell you known vulnerabilities and attacks. You should run your own vulnerability analysis on your system before an attacker does it. This is absolutely, and many people write delay 24 hours, delay, they don't want to do the update. Absolutely critical to keep your system patched, whether it's your home system or your office system, to keep them patched regularly.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to turn the presentation over into Q&A, and as we do that, I am going to load up the final poll, and hopefully we provided you with a great deal of information here on the session today. And you may have some additional questions regarding hiring Walsh students or experienced alumni. I mean, Barbara and her team are doing a great job of educating the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. So if you'd like to learn more about how to work with securing and hiring and recruiting some of those individuals, do let us know. Maybe we have you intrigued and you'd like to learn more about our upcoming cybersecurity webinars and events. Perhaps we piqued your intellectual curiosity and you might be thinking about going back to school to earn a Walsh IT or cybersecurity degree or a certificate program. There may be some other information that you'd like as well. But what I'd like to do now is move into poll, and I'm going to leave that last, Q&A, and I'll leave that last poll open as we move into Q&A. And we've had some great questions coming in throughout the session, and we actually had one very early on. I'm going to go back up to the top here, Barbara. And Mark had asked, Mark is asking, do you have any information on books I can purchase and how to safely secure a business network from intruders?
I could give you my whole bookshelf on that. I guess what I would like to know more, and you have my email, so please email me directly. Are you talking about a small business? Are you talking about a larger business? Small businesses what you don't even necessarily need a book, although there's many books, the NIST, N-I-S-T framework. There's a 5-step framework that works very, very well for small to mid-sized businesses that help you identify what your most important assets are, what needs to be secured, how you're securing them. And so that is one very available tool. The OWASP site gives a lot of information as well. There are many, many books. And if you're talking about networking or you're talking about securing your website, there are a number of different books I could recommend to you.
Okay, excellent. So the next question we have for Barbara is for Maureen, and Maureen would like to know, what concrete steps can we take to protect ourselves?
I once presented a cybersecurity presentation to seniors, and what I stressed with them is what I stress with everyone. You have to be a partner in protecting yourself. You cannot depend on anyone else protecting you. What does that mean? That means you make sure you secure your systems at home or with whatever tools you can at home. Keep your virus, keep your malware up to date. Make sure that you understand the risks when you are using embedded devices. Try to find those devices that allow you to add security to them, such as a baby monitor. Secure your smartphone. Put virus protection on it. Use a password on it. One piece that I tell people all the time is check your bank accounts regularly. Check your credit reports regularly. You don't want to be someone who learns 6 months later that your bank account has been emptied, your identity has been stolen. You have to assume responsibility for your own security right along with all of the other systems that are available.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. And another question has come in. We get this frequently asked, will a copy of the slides be available to the participants? Absolutely, Barbara and all others that have had that question. Sure. What we'll do in the next day or two after the webinars, we'll provide you a link where you can download a PDF copy of these slides.
And if you have any other questions that we don't address but you think about, please feel free to email me. I love to talk with folks.
Another question coming in from Adam, and Adam's asking, how do you assess the risk against attack prevention? In other words, how can a small business maximize security while not having to hire a bigger IT security team than the FBI? Great question.
And this is, as I was talking about, use the resources that are available. Vulnerability assessment tools, there are free vulnerability assessment tools. Assess your network. Establish policies, control what you can. Make sure you use virus protection. Make sure your systems are updated and patched. Make sure, as I referred to the NIST 5-step framework, make sure you know what is important to your business, your customer records, your financial records. Pay particular attention as to how you are securing them. There are a lot of resources available free of charge with experts that can provide you more guidance. There are checklists out there. Some of the NIST framework are very large and include many controls. You don't have to use them all. Look at them, survey what's relevant to your business, and then begin to implement them on a priority basis. You cannot eliminate all risks. You have to prioritize the greatest risks to the information and data that is of most value to you.
Great, thank you, Barbara. And another question, this one coming from Jill. Jill's asking, regarding internal threats, are there solutions out there without upgrading everything? DBAs have access.
Obviously, there's some standard methods you can use that have to do with personnel management. When you talk about always having people rotate, not having anyone have complete control over an important system, mandatory vacations, a lot of these are standard cyber. Monitoring it, you have to monitor what people do. You have to be aware. Data loss prevention tools. Is there data that is leaving my company that I'm not aware of? Background checks, there's a number of things. Strict policies with consequences. Those are just a number that I can think of offhand, but there are certainly many.
Okay, and a few final questions coming in here. One individual, Joseph, is asking if this webinar will be recorded so we can pass this on to others. And yes, absolutely, we'll have a link where you can watch a recorded playback of the session. You will need to register to watch the playback. We do like to know who's watching the information that we're putting out there, but it is free to watch that playback, and we'll be including that in the email you'll receive from us in the next few business days. I think that covers off just about all the questions. So while we're waiting to see if any additional ones come in here, what I'd like to do is turn the microphone back over to Barbara and just ask her if she'd like to offer any closing comments before we end.
I know that I have overwhelmed you with information because the evolution of cyber threats is increasing dramatically. But we have to be partners as cybersecurity professionals, as business members, as employees, as leaders. We have to begin to understand what those risks and threats are and do what we can to guard against them. It's absolutely critical.
All right, great. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, and we'll give you a few minutes back to your day. On behalf of all of us here at Walsh College, we'd like to thank you for joining us for the Cyber Chameleon webinar. We do hope that this information was useful to you. And before you close off, we'd love to hear any additional comments or feedback. If you could use chat, let us know, was this information useful for you? Did it meet your expectations on what you were hoping to achieve by joining us today? And any general comments. We are announcing an upcoming cybersecurity webinar series. I'm actually going to put the web address where you can go and learn more about those upcoming sessions. But again, in the poll, we do have a question that says if you'd like to be notified about upcoming cybersecurity events or webinars, to please let us know, and we'll make sure that you stay on our email list for those purposes. On behalf of all of us here at Walsh College, thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and end our audio broadcast, and we'll stay on the line for just a few more minutes. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.